Hi guys, I'm October, but you can call me Toby. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. Today, let's finish off this flowy granny square shirt for my friend. In the last few videos, I created the squares, joined them together, worked out side panels, added them on, and in the previous video, I created the center section and collar with the buttonholes. So today, I will be attaching that onto the garment and working out the rest. Once my center section was all complete, I could count the stitches up either side and across the back of the neck, and then compare that to the stitches on either side of my garment and across the back of the neck. So both sides of my center section had 154 stitches and the back of the collar had 27 stitches on the center section. On the garment, the back of the collar had 27 stitches, perfect, that's stitch for stitch when I crochet them together. But either side of my garment had 130 stitches. So that's 24 stitches difference between the sides of the garment and the sides of the center section, which I would have to deal with whilst crocheting this together. So I have used markers to attach the center section to the garment. I first attached each of the four corners, so the bottom two corners, and then counting up 154 stitches, I attached the 154th stitch onto the corner between the side and the neck of the garment. Then I did the same thing on the other side. Down either side I've placed markers at the top or bottom, depending how you look at it, of each square, and made sure that those line up with the corresponding points of the side panels once it's all divided up equally. I was careful to ensure that the top buttonhole lined up with the top of the third square down from the shoulders to ensure that the top button would be secured over the chest. I made sure by counting stitches that this same point was attached at the top of the third square down from the shoulders on the other side to ensure that my button and buttonhole would be lining up perfectly. I also wanted to ensure that when attaching the center section, I would keep the raised seams that I've been doing through all my other joints, and that on either side the seam would be pointing towards the outside of the garment, following the same raised seam as the rest of that side of the garment. Here's a look at how it will look with the buttons, but I am waiting on the rest of these buttons to turn up at this point, so you only get to see the preview with 3. I do need to think about how I want to make the hem too. I think I want to have it look as though it continues on from this center section and just goes straight down. Like it just runs straight into the hem. I don't think I want to make it like close off the bottom of the center section with blue and then have that move into the hem. I think I want to have it about as thick as the collar section, so maybe only 2 rows of red and then the single and 3 rows of blue. And I do want the raised seam on the bottom as well, which means I'll have to make it as a separate piece and join it in the same way I have everything else. To join the center section onto the garment, I tied on with my blue, and I am just single crocheting the garment onto the center section, making sure that I'm working with the side where I want this raised seam to point towards me. So you can see for this side I have the garment facing me and the center section facing in, and then I will rotate the garment to do the other side. To single crochet these two pieces together, I use the same method I have used to join all the squares and to put on the side panels. So I just keep an eye on how many stitches I have on the garment and how many stitches I have on the center section between each of my markers to make sure I can see where I need to do any 2-for-1 stitches, because I have a 24 stitch difference along either side that I need to account for. So there will be times where I need to do 2-for-1 stitches using 1 stitch on the garment and 2 stitches on the center section until I have used up those additional 24 stitches on the center section. And I want to do this as evenly as possible up each side so that the center section doesn't bunch up and doesn't cause the garment to bunch up when the two are attached. If you're not sure what I mean by 2-for-1 stitches, I went through that in detail in the first video, so I'll pop a card in here so you can go back to that and have a look, and you can see me doing a 2-for-1 stitch right here. So I'll keep crocheting these two together and come back once I've reached the other side to show you how it looks. It's all done now, and you can see how that looks. The blue is a nice strong element in contrast to the red tone, and I think having that extra row around the inside of the garment, as well as having the 3 rows of blue on the edge of the center section, really makes the blue pop here, and I'm really happy with how that's looking. So let's move on to the hem. I did forget to actually film making the hem. It was a bit of a hodgepodge process of me working out how to have it attach since I hadn't made it directly off of the center section. But what I ended up doing was tying on my red yarn at the first stitch on the inside of the left hand side of the center section, and I single crocheted 14 along the center section, and then I chained a really long chain that was long enough to fit all the way around the bottom of the garment, and then I single crocheted 14 onto the bottom of the right side of the center section, finishing up where the red finishes on the center section. I then did 2 rows after this of single crochet right around that hem, working out from the garment, before tying on with my blue on the left side and doing a row of border single crochet along the top that was closest to the garment, and I finished this up at the other side where I'd started single crocheting onto the center section again. I then actually at this point joined the hem onto the garment, so I single crocheted in the same way I have everything else, tying my blue onto the corner of where the center section finished at the bottom, and I joined the garment onto the hem all the way around. I then came back to the outer edge of the hem and did my 3 rows of single crochet in the blue around the outer edge, just making sure to work that up and around the corner that I now have in my center section and join it as seamlessly as I can onto the blue border of my center section so that it all looks like one piece, as best I can make it look like one piece at this point. I've created a couple of graphics to show where to tie on and tie off your yarn on the garment and the hemline, because explaining that was pretty confusing even for me. So hopefully this helps if you're attempting to do this yourself. Now that the hem is done, I will embroider the buttonholes. And you can see here that I've already done a few because I was working out how I would do this. Initially, I did think I would actually use a needle and this blue yarn to properly embroider the buttonholes, but it just looked really bulky. Even if I took the yarn and thinned it down to a few strands instead of the full amount of strands in this wool, it still just looked too bulky and it didn't look right because I didn't want to be putting the needle through the yarn. I wanted to go into the holes of the crochet. It just didn't look quite right. There may be a way that's neater that would look right to do that, but I am not aware of it, and so I decided I would crochet, just do single crochets around my buttonholes, and I was happy with how this looked. Actually, it from a slight distance this actually looks like little flowers, almost like little pops of blue down the center, so I really liked that. And looking back now that it was finished, I probably could have dropped my needle size down and done this in a smaller needle size so they were finer and done more stitches, but overall I was happy with how this looked. So up each side of the buttonhole I did 6 single crochets. I didn't do any single crochets directly into the bottom or the top of the buttonhole. I did them all along the sides. I was just working the single crochet in where it made sense to with the buttonholes and where it looked right. So each buttonhole's a little bit different depending on how the stitches surrounding it sit and how I went into those stitches with the single crochet. And I know that's not the most helpful example, but you can see here how I'm sort of placing those single crochets, and then at the bottom here I'm just gonna slip stitch back into my first one and tie off and weave my ends in at the back of the buttonhole. Overall, I don't think you need to embroider the buttonholes. You could just leave them as is. I do think adding a different colour to the buttonholes makes them more distinct. They stand out a bit more for use and it looks a bit more finished. But if you do decide to make this shirt, you're welcome to do the buttonholes however you would like. Perhaps you would like to embroider them. Maybe you'd single crochet them with a much finer needle and finer wool. Yeah, I'd be interested to see like variations on it, how it could look in different ways, but it's ultimately up to the creator how they'd like to finish off the buttonholes or leave them as they were to start with. And with the magic of editing, that's completed. Let's pop the buttons on now. I did not have matching thread for the buttons, so I unwound my blue yarn and used, I think, 3 strands of it as my thread. In my planning, the third sticky note is how I worked out the sleeves. I drew up a simple image for the armholes and counted the stitches along each edge, allowing a stitch for each corner. The diagram at the bottom was my first attempt, and I worked out how many rows for the width I thought would work, how to increase and decrease. This got frogged, it was far too heavy on the garment and it just didn't look right. This little diagram in the middle that says 128 rows, and between those 2 lines it says 2 stitches, that was the chosen sleeve and is the exact same design as the collar section and the hem. This finished off the sleeve without it being too heavy or bulky and kept the flowy appearance of the shirt. My friend did get to see the sleeve options and select which one she liked most. There was a third attempt that I did make, so I tried along the edge of where the sleeve would go to just use the blue yarn and do 2 rows of single crochet and 1 row of slip stitch to create a finished edge on the armhole in the blue yarn. But the small sleeve, my second attempt, was my friend's preference, so that's what we went with. Here's how the first attempt I did turned out. So my idea was for it to be folded over like this so that it would look like a little sort of, I think they're called capped sleeve, but it was just too bulky. It created a really heavy edge on the sleeve and it did not fold nicely, so the flowy look of the shirt was disturbed by this sleeve. And as soon as I'd finished this one, I sort of knew that it didn't sit quite right. Here is the second attempt, and as you can see, it looks the exact same as the collar section and the hem. It was a lovely little edging of a sleeve, so without creating a full-on sleeve that was quite heavy, this one kept the flowiness of the shirt but gave it that finished look. I did like the look of just finishing off the armholes with a few rows of the blue yarn, but my friend, after seeing the 3 options, liked this best, so that's what we went with. And in a second, I'll take you through how to do it. So let's make the sleeves. Starting off with a slip stitch, chain 3 and turn your work. Starting in the second loop from the hook, we're going to do 2 single crochet, chain 1 and turn your work. We'll continue on doing this, 2 single crochet, chain 1, turn your work, for the desired length of your sleeve. Mine was 128 rows in total. Once you have this to the desired length, you can fasten off, and you can fasten on with your border colour yarn. We'll be single crocheting along the full length that we've just created, chain 1, single crochet all the way back, chain 1, and then slip stitch all the way along. Then fasten off your yarn. We'll fasten on again on the other side and do a row of single crochet all the way along. And that is the border for your sleeve. Now I've marked up my sleeve already, a marker in the center and 2 markers at the 1/4 and 3/4 points. Now I'm going to fasten those onto my garment. The center point goes onto the top of your armhole. The 1/4 and 3/4 points go onto the top of the second square down from the shoulder. And then the base will be single crocheted straight onto the side panel at the bottom there. To attach the sleeve, we'll be single crocheting in the same way we have everything else for the garment. You may find that you need to do 2-for-1 stitches along here as well. Just keep an eye on the count of stitches on your sleeve and the count of stitches on your square, and ensure that you're keeping everything even. Once that is attached, you can finish off the top of the side panel with a row of single crochet and then a row of slip stitches and weave in all of the tails. Here is the finished shirt. I do love how it came out, but there are definitely some things I would change about it now that I've got the experience of having made it once. I would have made those buttonholes finer with a smaller crochet hook. I would have made sure that my center section and the buttons and buttonholes all lined up more accurately. But overall, I really love the design. I think this is something I would do again in perhaps a different set of granny squares. A different set of colours would be fun. If I were to make it for myself, I would omit the side panels and I would do the centre section wider overall, so that I could have the buttons sitting more in the centre of the centre section rather than right at the edge like they are. So on me, you can see that this is very loose, very flowy, quite baggy, but my friend absolutely adores it. It fits her really well at the moment, and if she does have a smaller frame in the future, we could take the side panels off. So I did end up making some ties after I'd finished everything else off. They are 200 chains long and then a row of single crochet back along using 2mm hook, and honestly if I had more time I would make it 1,000 chains so it reaches all the way down the side panel, but for now they're long enough for her to be able to cinch around the chest area if she'd like. I also filmed this view of the shirt laid inside out, just to give you an idea of how it would look if I hadn't have done those raised seams on the outside. So although the squares are backwards here, you can see how flat the seams look against the rest of the garment. This might be preferable to some people, but I really liked the raised seams. And a nice full view of that gorgeous back panel. I'm so in love with the colours of this and how well the yellow pops against the more neutral tones and how nicely the blue contrasts. Now we're at the end. This has been quite a long adventure, and if you join me for all 4 videos, thank you so much. I hope you'll join me again for my next one. For anyone who stuck around right to the end, you may have noticed in this video a hint as to what the next crochet video will be about. Pop a comment down if you think you did, and I'd love to hear what you thought about the shirt and how you might do things differently. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. Have a great day. Bye.